Wanted to talk to you a little bit today about limiting work in process. And it's kind of funny because I don't have a display screen here, so I actually have to turn back and look and see where I'm at. So, how many people here know who W. Edwards Deming was? Nice, nice. He actually got people in the States beat. So I just came, the beginning of this trip was at the Deming conference, which we helped put on this year. And one of the big things that Deming wanted to get across to people is that you actually have to understand your work in order to be able to do it. So in order to be able to improve, in order to be able to develop the right thing, you need to actually be able to ask the right questions. And he was saying, if you can't ask those, then you can't improve and you can't discover anything. Go forward. There you go. So I'm going to add a little bit to that and say that if we're overloaded, we actually don't have the capability to ask the right questions at all. So how many people here, when you go to work, how many of you need more work to do? Yeah, two, right? So, and you're the ones that basically, would you raise your hand if I said anything? Yeah, I figured. So, in general, everyone is overloaded. And we're overloaded in the work that we do in software, especially because we can't see it. Everything's a concept or a theory until we put it into like code. And even when it's a code, we still don't really know what the hell it is. So, how many people have gotten into somebody else's code and not been able to even begin to decipher what it did? So even when we can see their work, we don't really know what they were doing. So really quickly, who am I? Should have put that earlier in the slide deck. I'm Jim Benson. Again, I look like that. I love to eat. I travel all over the world, ostensibly to talk, but really I'm just there to eat the food. So that's what I'll be doing this evening. I got my start in psychology, which really shows in kind of the work that we do. We always try and look at what are the implications of the systems that we're building on the work that we do, which has got me here, but it's also gotten me in a lot of trouble. So if you want to hear me tell you exactly why Scrum doesn't work, you can talk to me later and I'll tell you exactly why psychologically it cannot work. So I almost got a degree in psychology, got ready to graduate, looked at the other people that I was going to graduate with and realized that if I graduated with a degree in psychology, I'd spend my life surrounded by psychologists. And that seemed like a really bad idea. So I got a degree in urban planning instead and built huge things. So on the way here this morning, taking the train in, the subway in, I was in love with the subway systems. That's what I used to build. I used to go around the world and build giant things like subway systems. So my projects all had billion-dollar price tags. This is what always amused me when people said building software is hard, because I was like, but software is so tiny. And I'm a process consultant, I'm a process coach, I'm a process whatever you want to call me, and I absolutely hate process. So the first thing I'll do in any organization is try and destroy whatever processes they have and replace them with as much nothing as I possibly can. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. So we developed this thing called Kanban. We gave it 2 rules because I don't like process, right? So we said, we want you to see what you're doing. There it is. Visualize your work and then limit your work in process. It turned out that the visualization of work was really easy. And it was so easy that people stopped there. So there's tons of Kanban tools on the market right now that don't limit your work in process because they didn't want to go that far. Well, there's only 2 rules. So in my mind, you really should do both. But limiting WIP is very hard. Limiting work in process is extremely difficult. Theoretically, it's easy. You say, I'm just going to work on a couple of things at a time. You work on them, and life is good. Everybody's happy. Well, it's not that easy. And it's not that easy because we live in a world with other human beings. And people are messy, and they're annoying, and they should just leave us alone, right? So go on. There we go. So, oh, I didn't know that I had to avoid that corner. So, there we go. You can see me anyway, just look down. So, right now there's a lot of movement in Agile, which is inherently a team-based thing, to scale it. Which is kind of like saying, if I like an apple and I want to share it with my friends, I should make a really big apple. And that's not the way that fruit works, and it's not the way that software or the process works either. The scalability doesn't come from taking something that we did and doing it bigger. It comes from being able to have coherent systems. So when we want to build any system, we have to basically say, what is the story behind what we're building? When we're building a scalable system, it would be nice to have some traceability. In essence, am I doing the thing I'm doing right now because of some idea or purpose? Or am I just doing stuff? So I'm sure we've all had it where we download the most recent update to a piece of software that we have, and it says click here for the release notes, and it's this huge list of arbitrary things, most of which have no value to the user. Or worse yet, it just says fixed miscellaneous bugs. So you're like, okay, I just waited for 25 minutes for this to load and do everything with, and you've just fixed miscellaneous bugs. So I don't have a story to tell. So we want to make sure that we're building our systems that let us know what we're doing, who we're doing it for, why we're doing it. And then basically, it says here when we're going in the wrong direction. These two are kind of the same to me. What does right actually look like? So if we don't know what right looks like, we don't know what we're building or who we're building it for, we can't ask the right questions. Okay? And if we're so busy trying to meet that next deadline, then we are only going to be focused on the deadline. We're not focused on actually quality or the work. So, yeah, just not quite enough power there. So what do we want? We want to build basically a learning organization. I'm going to get good. We want to build an organization that has a system in it that naturally learns. Okay. We want all the people in the company to actually be involved in creating value. So if you have a QA group, you've already failed. If you have a sales group, you've already failed because they're focused on a siloed object and not on the company as a whole. If you have developers that just say, I want a product owner to give me stuff that I will dumbly type and then give it to the QA people, not so good. So we would like to have everyone understand what this is so that they can apply, so that you can apply, so that everyone can apply your professional talents to actually getting the work done, right? We want to understand that in the end, if we're just creating stuff, especially stuff that other people have already created, that's low margin work. The company can't survive very long without some high margin objects. So invention is actually where real margin in a company comes from. You can't have this type of invention by having an R&D group or by getting together once a year with the IDEO people and just ideating. You actually have to be ideating the entire year by having everybody understand what the company does and how it's doing it. So what's that have to do with WIP? So work in process is, in essence, the work that is going on right now. In almost every company or organization that I've walked into at the beginning, they always have too much work in process. For individuals, for teams, for the company as a whole. WIP limiting is actually a scalable issue. So if I limit my WIP as an individual, but the company is still overloaded, doesn't do a whole lot of good. So unfortunately, here's where we're going to get into the heavy geekery part of this, and is we have a bunch of different kinds of work in process. And as you can see here, this is slide 1. There's more than one type of pain. So when we talk about limiting WIP, people tend to stop here, which is the work that I'm actually individually doing right now, right? So that's normal WIP. So we have a Kanban or we have a board, and it says, our backlog, our doing, and our doing has a number on it. We try and do less than that. That's just great. So here's the way this works. I am an individual contributor. I'm working on a team, and we're limiting our WIP, and everything feels good. Okay, everybody comes to our board. Everything is totally clean. Yet, for some strange reason, our quality is really suffering, and we're late. And that's because we probably have a bit of ambient WIP, which means that I'm actually working on 4 or 5 projects at once, right? So I went to one company in the States, and they said, some of our teams are doing Scrum, some of them are doing Kanban, some of them are doing some other stuff, but we don't think that's the problem. We can't figure out what's going on. So I said, all right, well, I'll come in and take a look. So I went to the first stand-up meeting, and it was great. Second, third, fourth stand-up meetings for the teams was great. By the time I got up to the 7th or 8th stand-up meetings for teams 7 and 8, I started to see people I recognized. I was like, oh, that's nice. They're coming to each other's stand-up meetings and keeping informed. And then when I got to 10 or 11, I saw teams entirely comprised of people that I'd already met. And I was like, how many projects are you guys working on? And they said, oh, not that much, like 5 or 6. It's like, that might be a bit much. And they're like, well, they're all very important. Well, I'm sure they are. So we have work on other projects, also usually overloaded. So here we have individual overload. Here we start to have team or organizational overload. And that's sneaking up on us, and it's getting a little bit insidious until we come up here to hidden WIP, which is I'm working with one of the teams here, and I wanted to be clever and catch one of the people, so they're typing away on something, and I know it's not what that team's working on. And so I said, what's that? Because I thought it was going to be one of these other projects. And he said, oh, I'm working on level 3 support. He's like, I coded something a couple weeks ago, and it's all screwed up, so I'm helping fix it. So how often do you do that? Oh, not that much, like 8 to 10 hours a week. It's like, great. All right, so good for you. So now what we've got is we've got the work that we do, which we are probably overloaded on. We have the work that the teams do, which are probably overloaded. And then we have work that is truly corporate. This is like work that we're not tracking, but it's really important. It's marketing, it's RFPs, it's reporting, it's all those things that we do because we actually are part of a larger company. And that company has things it really needs to do. So this isn't crap. Because people get mad and they say, I just want to go back to work and do this. It's like, no, if you don't do this, the company dies. I consider this whole thing to be real work. Now, we need to understand it so that we can actually logically limit it and do something with it. But this is real stuff. So it's stuff we don't talk about, stuff we hide, obviously. But it's real stuff. So, boy, I wish it ended there. But it doesn't. So let's say you're back here, and you're working on 4 or 5 projects. Say I'm here, I'm working on 4 or 5 projects. I'm trying my best to keep up with them. But, emergency comes up on project B and project C I kind of have to put off for a little bit. Project manager for project C gets kind of bent out of shape, comes over to my desk and says, why aren't you working on my stuff? I say, well, because I'm working on this other stuff. And I say, well, my stuff's really important. I say, well, so is that stuff. And say, well, you should really be working on our stuff. It's like, well, okay, let's get together and have a meeting to discuss why I'm not working on your project, but actually working on that other project, right? So all of a sudden, the work in process that we have starts to foster or breed more work in process. So the more work we do, the more work we have to do managing the work that we're doing. And it doesn't take too long to figure out that that can't be sustained, right? So we have meetings about our work. So then we're busy in these meetings, we're busy doing level 2 support, we're busy doing all of these projects, and nothing's getting done. So the rest of the company's frustrated with us, we're frustrated with our jobs. And so this happened at the company I was just mentioning, was I got everybody into a room very much like this one, have a bunch of charts and graphs behind me about context switching and how if you went back and forth and did this, it would completely destroy your ability to finish anything. I'm all proud of myself, and I'm writing on something, and I've got my back to the audience, and somebody says, you know, that's not what we spend most of our time doing. And that person's boss, or one of that person's many bosses, said, it's not? And he says, no, we spend most of our time actually doing, this is a financial services firm, we spend most of our time doing favors for traders on the floor. Spend about 20 hours a week doing that. So basically, everyone in IT in this company had some friend somewhere else in the company that would call them up and say, can you run this query for me? Can you do this? Can you make this report? And they would do it. And I remember I was just dumbfounded. I was like, so we finished the big meeting. Everybody left. I was lying in my bed that evening in my hotel room. I was like, why would anybody do that? If you're already overloaded, you already know all the projects that you're going to have are going to be so late. Why would you do that? Why would you take on extra work that you can't even get credit for? You can't even tell your boss you did it because you'll get in trouble. So can anybody guess why you would do that?
Success.
Yeah.
Something you can actually do.
Yeah. It's so that you have some reassurance that you're actually a professional and can finish something. Yeah. This is purely you trying to I've got to help someone in my career. Otherwise, my life is just a big ball of this pain, and I don't want my life to be a big ball of that pain. So now we've got two more kinds of work in process that we've already added to the overload that we acknowledged that we had with the first column. And now we have existential WIP, which kind of comes up at the end, which is like stuff you wish you could do. So how many times have you been like at work and a bunch of you get together and you say, man, I just wish we could build this. And you talk about it for 4 hours because your desire for it is that great. You know that everything's late. You know that things aren't going to get done. You know that there's all these other problems going on. But you have such a desire to get that work done, to do this thing. And you know no one's ever going to let you do it. So it just sits there and bugs you, right? So how many people want to go back to work now? This is why limiting work in process is such an easy thing to put in that number 2 slot, but it's such a difficult thing to do. Because we've got political, we've got psychological, we've got emotional, we've got structural, we've got procedural things all through these 6 that they're deep. They're deep issues. And what we would like to do once we put that initial Kanban up is we want to say we are putting a stop to this churning of pain. We want to build an actual better world. And we want to do that by creating processes that don't allow that stuff to happen. And we don't want to do that with a bunch of rules and a bunch of policies and procedures. We want to make these systems as simple as possible. And how might we do that? So how might we cure some of these things? So the first thing that we had there was just kind of the normal WIP, our personal work in process. And generally, this is the planned work. So these are things that are happening in projects that we know is coming. So we walked into a project with a support group for a mid-sized software company. And this support group was in a location in the US, is in a state called West Virginia. It's in a place where you don't expect to find educated people. This was a group of West Virginians. And when we arrived, their bosses said, you know, we don't have the best staff here. So it kind of started off in a hole, right? And they had this issue where they had a backlog of 2,000 tickets, and they couldn't get it to go away. They were taking in 250 tickets a day, and they were doing 250 tickets a day. And so they had set up a system where they were rewarding the person who got the most tickets done in a day, which was, yeah, I do appreciate that some people find that amusing right off the bat. It was at that point, it was just like, well, here's what we're doing. We've got this award, and it's just kind of like, oh, tell me you're joking. No, we're not joking. Okay, so everything you would expect happened around that. So just like in Andre's keynote, they had set up a system that was providing a carrot, or what they assumed was a carrot, but what actually just turned out being something that put the brakes on their ability to finish their work. And they had 24 people in the group that they had, and they said we're a team. But what we told them was that they were a bowling team. Is everybody went out there individually and tried to do their best, but they had no collaboration, no teamwork whatsoever. They had planned work that they were overloaded with, but they didn't understand the nature of that planned work because they didn't understand that there were different work item types in there. They didn't understand that different people called with different problems that could be handled differently by the organization if they set up a system to do that. So we started talking about this, and Tony and I were really concerned about this because we didn't know how much these people could do because they were so not very bright. So they're sitting there in this meeting and they're talking to us, and they said, we're really upset because our NPS scores, our Net Promoter Scores have gone down. How many people know what a Net Promoter Score is? About half. So Net Promoter Score is basically, it's basically one measure, which is you ask the people that you're dealing with, would you recommend this service to a friend? So many companies, Comcast, British Telecom, etc., have negative Net Promoter Scores. They would kill to have Net Promoter Scores of 20 or 30, and this is out of 100. And go negative 100 to positive 100. And so I said, what is your Net Promoter Score? And they said, it's 89. And I said, negative 89? And then they got really mad at me. They're like, no, 89. And so I was like, okay, you're dumb and you're liars. So I did. I actually got up and I left the room, and I went through the building, and I found somebody that I trusted, and I said, hey, the support people just told me about their Net Promoter Scores. They said, oh yeah, they're really low. I was like, really? I said, what were they before? And they said 95. So all of a sudden I realized I was sitting in a room with like the most successful support group in history. These people were really good at their jobs. And I was like, and so I went back in and I was like, okay, you guys realize that you're actually really good at your job. And they just stared at me. They were so angry because they knew that they sucked so bad at their work. But because they were so focused on that 2,000 ticket thing, and they were so focused on the fact that they couldn't get rid of it, that they didn't actually recognize that their customers absolutely loved them and they helped them every single time they got on the phone. So we got them to calm down a little bit and actually pay attention to this. And what we did was we said, look, you know, there's different kinds of work. It comes in, some stuff takes a long time, some stuff doesn't. Sometimes some things require expertise, some things don't. If you're doing things on a first in, first out, where just whoever answers the phone takes it, you'll never know who can be trained. You'll never know, you know, who should have handled a particular ticket. So we said, we want you to consider three things. We want you to consider dividing up into teams. We want you to consider paying attention to continuous improvement. And we want you to have zero tolerance for suckage. So if anything sucks, fix it. Don't wait for the manager or anybody else. You just fix it. And if you get in trouble for it later, that's great. So they did. And within 2 months, their 2,000 ticket backlog was down to 950. But they did all of that themselves just by being empowered and by understanding that there was a problem with this, and if they just addressed it directly, it would go away. I'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. Boop, there we go. So ambient work. Ambient work we talked about earlier with the people that had the 10 million projects going on. So I asked them I said, you guys have too many projects going on. You need to limit it. And the managers got really upset. Managers are like, these have been programmed in. They're part of the portfolio. This is going, they have to go through. There's too much political baggage for them not to go through. And so I'm like, oh yeah, well, that's something like a manager would say, but I'll go to the teams and the teams will love me. So like several years ago, there was this guy called George Bush, and he said, we're going to go into Iraq and they're going to hail us as victors and we're going to be out in 18 months. Yeah, that didn't work so well. So sometimes you don't quite understand the value of the clients that you're working with. So I went to the developers and said, hey, we're going to lower the number of projects, and they got so mad because they had all put themselves, their own energies into each of those projects. And they all knew that anything that they started would never get done. So no one was willing to cancel or stop a project, right? So what we had to do was we actually had to visualize the projects in process. Each team had a Kanban board, and it was on a rolling whiteboard. And it looked, like I said, they all looked perfect. They're all perfectly WIP limited. They were all perfectly balanced. Everybody had the right amount of work to do, but nothing was getting done. So I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to put a piece of paper along the bottom of the rolling whiteboard. And I just want everybody to put Post-it notes in for the tasks that they're doing on other projects. And they're like, oh, well, that makes sense. At least we'll know. And they put it in, and it looked like a big hula skirt. It was just like this big, huge mass all the way across the board of Post-it notes. And it looked so stupid that no one could deny that there was a problem. So the processing of visual information helped us limit their work in process, because at that point, no one could deny that there were too many Post-it notes for that to continue. So we want to visualize the projects that we have in process any way we can that will help us allow that ambient WIP, allow those concurrent projects to be brought down to a level where they can actually be completed. So they're within the capacity of the company as a whole to finish. And sometimes that might involve some people not being assigned to projects. It doesn't mean we have to lay them off. It means that for brief periods of time, people might be waiting for a new project to come up. But how many people have seen this? You have a sprint, you have 1,100 developers on your team, and a QA person, and then everybody's typing as fast as they can to meet the sprint goals, and it's all going over to QA, and it's just piling up, and then you don't make the sprint, and then you blame QA. It's because the system that you set up didn't have capacity. Yes, all those developers were very productive building untested code, but the system itself didn't have the capacity to release the software. So it's better that some people are idle for short periods of time, in that it shows where the system is imbalanced. Otherwise, we're going to continue to release defective, technical debt-laden product. So then we have hidden WIP. So this is, these are those little niggling interruptions. I have here a trivial one over here, which is Facebook, but that could also be like HR saying, come do this, or whatever. There's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of interruptions, and we have infinite capacity right now to be interrupted. So, when you guys are all probably working on projects, when project plans were originally divided up or written up, I'm reasonably sure that this conference wasn't part of those project plans. So this conference itself is one of these interruptions. It's one of those anomalies that happens during the project that takes one or more resources away from the project. And we very rarely are upfront and honest about how that impacts our ability to work. Right? So what we would like to do as individuals and teams and organizations is understand what is interrupting us, and interrupting is it's a hard word to use, right? But this is anything that isn't part of a project that could come along, and it could have high value, medium value, low value, or no value at all. Understand what those are, and then start to include those in our forecasts and in our plans. So that we won't say, I think that you're going to be 80% available to my project, because that's absolutely meaningless. What's meaningful is actually understanding that you spend about 20 hours of your work servicing the rest of the company, and that you actually only have about 20 hours that you can have active on a project, and then a certain percentage of that is what your actual availability is. So it'd be 80% of the 20 hours, not 80% of the 40 or 35 or whatever we're basing it on. So as we go forward now, if we've limited those three, even if we just limit one of those three, but if we've limited all of those three, we know that this stuff is going to largely go away, because we're no longer going to have meetings talking about how we need meetings to talk about the meetings about how we didn't get things done. What we want to do now is we want to actually start to look at the system as a whole, right? So visualize our company as a system and how work flows through it, either in individual projects or as individual tasks. And understand, as individual developers or QA people or UX or whatever, what can you be doing to either improve the systems that are there or to improve the product or its relationship to the customer. I can't count for you how many times I've walked into companies and they've said, we need a Kanban board to do this, this, and this. And I say, who is your customer? And they can't answer the question. And I say, what does your product do? And they can't answer that question either. So I worked with a company that was doing well over $100 million in receipts every year just recently. And they were very happy with that. But they still couldn't define who their customer was or what their product was. Now, yes, we would all like that problem. But at the same time, that company is essentially doomed. You can keep that up for a certain time. So I hope that they were putting some of that money in the savings account, because it is untenable. We're going to talk more about this in a second, but when you're in a situation where you have induced work in process, and let's say that induced work in process is you have a project and work flows through it nicely, and then it comes to a screeching halt when it has to go through legal, or it has to go through some content review, or it has to go through something or something else. And you have all these other tasks that are flying all the way through to completion and everybody's happy, but these other things are stuck there. We want to actually start to calculate what the cost of delay is for those, because that's also how you get rid of this induced WIP. So a lot of times induced WIP can be a political or a part of the internal structure that you're not directly responsible for. And if you go and you say, I hate legal, they make my work hard. Number one, no one can act on that. And number two, they just call you a whiner and tell you to go back to your desk and sit down, right? But if you can actually prove to them that there is a cost of delay, and you make that argument external, so it's not I don't like them, but that this action is slowing the system down, that's something that people can act on. And it's you talking about the system, not you talking about the people, right? So there's an interesting balance here when we're dealing with work in process about what is systemically caused and what are our individual responsibilities or abilities to impact that system. Does that make sense? Because that's like a thing. So the start of the Agile Manifesto is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Worst line in human history. Don't listen to that, because individuals and interactions are your process, and you enact your process through the use of tools. So if you divide those things up, you end up with a bipolar system. Not a good idea. Yes, we want individuals and interactions to be our focus, And maybe that's over processes and tools, but that's not how it's been taken. So we want to understand that our processes that we're setting up are the things that are actually the way that our culture is, our corporate culture is expressed. So how do we get rid of Gorilla WIP? This is a problem. So I talked about that company that were doing favors for traders on the floor. Told this to the managers, and the managers were like, that stops today. And I was like, if that stops today, your company's going to die. There's a reason that those favors are being done. There's a breakdown in the flow of information which is necessary for work to be done on the floor. And if the traders can't trade, the company dies. So you have built now a black market of data, of information. And I see this a lot in large companies. There's some systemic issue where data doesn't, or information doesn't flow smoothly, but information is kind of like a river. It just flows, and if you put up a dam, it builds up, and then it moves around the dam, and then it flows. It's very, very insistent. Or it'll go over the dam, or it'll go under the dam, or what have you. So information will not allow itself to be unexpressed. So this is the expression of absolutely vital corporate information that the current system won't allow to flow smoothly. So we need to really work with caution when we are creating mitigations for these. And oh, now I'm doing it. It's just funny how that like totally blows your train of thought. So we want to understand that these are systemic issues, and that we want to be very honest about the systems that we're interacting with. So when we build our Kanbans, we never want to build a Kanban for the work that we wish we did. You want to start with the work that you're actually doing, no matter how ugly and silly and ridiculous it might look. And in fact, if you can build a board initially that in the silliest way possible shows the pain that everybody is suffering, you totally win. Because the board itself can diffuse some of the difficult conversations that you would have about why work isn't happening the way it should, especially around the selection of what you build. We tend to build a lot of features, that nobody uses. Usually developers know somewhere that some of these features might be a little bit spurious. Building systems that will allow people to say, you know what, I don't think we need to build that, but we really do need to build this other thing. Those are the ones that win. So this is kind of a big sentence here, but I want to revisit it one more time. This work for large organizations is the way that work is increasingly done as the processes for the company solidify. So being also understanding that that these people tend to operate with heavy weaponry is that some of these issues, some of this guerrilla whip can be quite explosive and can hurt you if you don't handle it appropriately. So again, when you're dealing with things like this or with the previous screen, try to visualize it and let the visual system do the arguing for you. Don't run in and say, hey, I've discovered that you're all corrupt and should be arrested. People aren't gonna respond well to that. So last bit here, one of the last bits, is basically this is kind of what we would like to see. This is a logical flow of work, right? This is the way work usually happens, which is that we have some very vague thing to do initially. We really don't know what happens before, and we're certain at the end we're going to make lots of money. And I'm going to use this slide again in a couple of hours. What we would like to do in business is we would like to do this thing at the end. We need to actually have a coherent story in order to get to that. And our coherence is based both on the product that we're creating and the internal system that we have. So there's a law called Conway's Law, which basically says that the thing that you're creating is basically an instantiation of the culture that's creating it. So Windows 8, that's kind of how it works, is that if you have a confused and annoying culture, you will create a confused and annoying product. So go on. Oh, wrong thing. So we have a social network, and that social network is not the org chart. Okay. So years ago, when we decided that managers were bad, we developed Agile. And when we developed Agile, we developed self-organizing teams, which should be set up something like this. And then we found out, well, it'd be really a good idea if the self-organizing teams, now that they don't have a project manager, it'd be a good idea if they had a scrum master. And then we said, well, we got rid of the product manager, and now everybody's kind of confused, so maybe we'll have a product owner. And we basically created the same org chart that we had before. But what really happens is you might have your scrum master here, and this might be your product owner, but information doesn't necessarily flow, through the normal channels. And so when we set up a board, this is one of our boards. This board is actually an instantiation of the internal modus cooperandi social network. So we see that there's work over here which is kind of cut off, but this is work that anybody can do. These are things that I need to do or Tony Ann needs to do. John's working on this and so forth. But right now what happens is this board is our scrum master. Right? This board actually is our product owner. And over here, back to the other side, we have a filter that allows us to figure out what things are going to make it into our daily or on deck columns. We know by looking at this that who's working on what. All of these are tied directly for us into Slack. So right now I have my phone shut off so that it won't bug me when I'm talking. But if it wasn't, it would buzz every so often because John or Tony Ann or Patty or somebody would be finishing something, and that actually gets driven directly to Slack. So I can come here on the board and get an entire view of things, and then I also get kind of a serial view of what's happening in my hip. What's also pretty interesting about that is that we talk a lot about trust and how important trust is. And trust in business comes from one thing and one thing only, and that's, did you finish your work? There's a lot of things that can build on that trust, but that's the basic trust of working with somebody else, is do you have my back, and are you actually helping me provide value? So when I go into companies and say, we have a real problem with trust, I'm like, no, you have a problem with completion. And if we can get people actually completing things collaboratively so they can see that their colleagues are doing stuff, trust will not be a problem. Now, whether or not your people like each other, that's an entirely different situation. So I actually like to focus more on, does your team like each other? And then if they don't, then that's a conversation you can have. But as long as work in process is like through the roof and no one is finishing anything, of course you're not going to have any trust. You might have a little bit of camaraderie in the team because you're angry with the company for giving you so much work. But by and large, you're still not going to trust each other because you don't see that the finishing column is done. So there's no clock. What am I at? I have no idea. 10 minutes. Oh, awesome. Thank you. I see, I could kind of feel it. In Louisville, Kentucky, there's these people. And if anybody here has a chance to go to the States, Louisville, Kentucky is not a place you would normally go. Okay, but this place is amazing. It is a co-working facility, and there's a lot of co-working facilities. So who cares? Well, this is a co-working facility that builds appliances. So you can go there and build your own fridge. You can go there and build your own cooktop. You can go there and build your own thing. It's the only co-working facility in the world with a grade A chef's kitchen in it. It is phenomenal. And anybody can walk in and build anything. And the rule is, before you build something, there's their shop there. It's gorgeous. There's their Kanban. I'll come back to that. Is you need to launch your Kickstarter campaign and see if people give a damn. Okay, so they'll do some prototypes in the shop, without very much effort. But before they can actually dive in, they have to be able to do this. And this is actually one of the things that they created, and that's what they raised. It's like, holy crap! I could not believe this. So when you walk in, this is basically their portfolio Kanban, and these are the products that currently are in the ideation and evaluation stage, and then these are the things that have been completed. But you can't see it because the thing's a little bit dim, but each of these has a picture. So whenever anybody comes into the building, the first thing that they're greeted with is basically, look, this is our work in process. These are the things that we're actually developing that have never, ever, ever been developed before. And they have things on the market, lots of things on the market already, like 15 or 20 things on the market already. And one of the other rules there is that everything there is collaborative. So if you come in, you want to build your own nugget ice maker, this is actually, the housing in this is like a wine fridge. And they basically hacked a wine fridge and an ice maker to make this tabletop completely clear nugget ice maker for drinks. That you have to, if anybody else wants to work on your project, you gotta let them. So what happens there is all of a sudden, you might have a great idea, but now there are people that can come along and they can say, okay, you know what? If you want completely clear freezing ice, you need to deal with all of these thermodynamic issues. So they're like, cool, I hook ice maker to machine, I get ice. And people come along and say, no, you get muddy, watery, cloudy ice. If you want clear stuff, ice has to flow in slowly, water has to flow in slowly, it has to freeze like this, etc. So the collaboration then gives you all sorts of new expertise, or all sorts of experts, and then that person is now an expert in the world of ice making. Everyone there works on one project at a time. Period. So you pick your project, you see through it, or you abandon it, you go to something else, but you don't work on multiple projects. So they are, as an organization, limiting their work in process by that. And then I'm going to skip that. So just really quickly here to sum up. This stuff is all true, but the most important thing here is that we need to pay attention in order to do our work. We can't pay attention if we're not limiting our work in process. Now, I mean, this is like the thing that I will lead with in a personal Kanban talk. So if you're coming to the class tomorrow, this is like the thing that I'll lead with, and we'll talk a lot more about this. But this is really difficult to achieve. And so when you guys all go back to work, you'll know now the limiting work in process isn't simply saying just do 3 things, but it's actually paying a lot of attention to the needs of the people on your team and to the real work that they're doing. Because if you say our team's super WIP limited and we're only doing 3 things and they're completely overloaded with invisible stuff, they're going to hate you. They're going to think that the whole system is a big joke. And that is the end of this talk. And I have like 4 minutes, I think, for questions. If there is one. So So you're all going to go back and limit WIP immediately? Yes. I limit my own WIP by staying on airplanes where it's physically impossible for me to do more than one thing at a time. But how I'm limiting my WIP is back in that, I won't go back to it, but the Modus board that we have. Earlier this year, my partners and I noticed that we too were falling off of the WIP limiting wagon. And so what we did was we made a pact to be very, very vigilant about what we were doing and what we would put in the board. And then also, probably the most important thing for us is we get together twice a week, regardless of where we are on the planet, and we will do co-working sessions where basically we'll just work together. And what we've found is that when you have a group of people who have a lot of demands on their time, if you put them in a room and you just say just work, productivity goes way up and focus goes way up and the ability to ask other people questions goes way up. So you both get the collaborative conversations and the productivity rise. So especially if you're in a company and you figured out that something small has to happen, don't give everybody tasks in the meeting and expect them to go off and do them. Actually call another meeting for a couple of hours and say between 3 and 5 on Friday, we are going to finish this, and then make them not have to think about it at all until they get in the room. So those are some of the things that we do. All right, so I'd bug you for more questions, but since there's already a mini exodus, why don't we break there and everybody can get some refreshments? And if you have any other questions, just come up and ask me. This is a lot more complicated than I ever thought it was going to be. So thanks, everybody.